Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a massive wave of unrest shaking the heart of Eastern Europe. Over 100 protesters have flooded the streets of Minsk and other major cities across Belarus, demanding the resignation of long-time President Alexander Lukashenko. What began as scattered opposition rallies has now turned into one of the largest and most determined protest movements in the country's history. This is not just another political dispute, it's a full-blown uprising that could redefine Belarus's future. For decades, Lukashenko, often dubbed Europe's last dictator, has ruled Belarus with an iron fist. Since coming to power in 1994, he's maintained tight control over the media, suppressed political opposition, and relied heavily on the country's powerful security services to silence dissent. But the tide seems to be turning. The people of Belarus, weary of economic hardship, political repression, and fraudulent elections, have reached their breaking point. What we are witnessing right now is a nation rising up against decades of authoritarian rule. The spark for this latest wave of demonstrations was the controversial presidential election that many believe was rigged in Lukashenko's favor. Official results claimed a sweeping victory for him, with more than 80% of the vote, while opposition figures and independent observers reported widespread irregularities, ballot stuffing, and intimidation. This triggered an outpouring of anger across the country. Within hours of the announcement, thousands began pouring into the streets, waving red and white flags, the historical colors of Belarus's independence movement, and chanting "Leave" and "Long live Belarus." At the center of the movement is a new generation of Belarusians who have grown up under Lukashenko's rule, but are no longer willing to accept it. Students, factory workers, doctors, and IT professionals have joined forces in a rare show of unity. Even state employees and television journalists have started resigning in protest, defying the government's long-standing culture of fear. Social media has become a crucial tool in mobilizing crowds, with encrypted apps like Telegram allowing protesters to coordinate rallies and share updates in real time despite government attempts to shut down the internet. The protests have grown rapidly, with tens of thousands filling Independence Square in Minsk, forming human chains and carrying flowers in acts of peaceful defiance. But the government's response has been brutal. Riot police, known locally as the Aman, have used stun grenades, tear gas, and rubber bullets to disperse crowds. Thousands have been detained, and many report beatings and torture while in custody. Despite the violence, the movement remains largely nonviolent, emphasizing solidarity and discipline over aggression. What's striking about this uprising is the resilience of the people. Every time security forces clear one protest, another emerges somewhere else. Women, dressed in white, have formed peaceful marches demanding the release of prisoners and the end of police brutality. Workers in major factories have gone on strike, halting production and declaring their refusal to support the government any longer. In the face of fear, the people of Belarus are showing immense courage. Lukashenko, however, is not backing down. In his speeches, he has accused Western nations of trying to destabilize Belarus, claiming that the protests are part of a foreign plot. He's called on Russia for support, warning that if Belarus falls, the rest of the region will follow. Vladimir Putin has publicly expressed backing for Lukashenko, offering security assistance if needed. This dynamic has raised alarm in Europe and the United States, which have condemned the crackdown and called for new, free, and fair elections. Internationally, the crisis has drawn attention to the growing divide between authoritarianism and democracy in Eastern Europe. The European Union has imposed sanctions on Belarusian officials responsible for the violence and fraud, while global human rights organizations have demanded accountability for abuses. But for many inside Belarus, foreign statements mean little compared to the daily reality of repression. The real battle is being fought on the streets, by ordinary citizens risking everything for a chance at freedom. One of the most symbolic moments of the uprising came when hundreds of thousands gathered in Minsk, waving the red and white flag, singing patriotic songs, and holding up pictures of detained activists. It was a moment of unity that transcended fear. Drone footage from that day showed a sea of people stretching across the city, one of the largest protests in Belarusian history. The message was clear: Lukashenko's time is running out. Still, the road ahead is uncertain. The regime's control of the security forces remains firm, and the opposition lacks a unified leadership after many figures fled the country or were imprisoned. Yet, the people's determination is unlike anything seen before. Even without a central figure, the movement continues to organize organically, relying on grassroots networks and local communities. As night falls in Belarus, protests continue under the watchful eyes of police and military patrols. Flashlights and phone screens light up the dark streets, symbolizing both resistance and hope. The chant "Jive Belarus," "Long live Belarus," echoes through the city squares, a rallying cry that unites people from every walk of life. These protests are no longer just about an election. They're about dignity, justice, and the right to determine their own future. Observers say this uprising could mark the beginning of the end for Lukashenko's 30-year rule, though change in authoritarian systems is rarely simple. Many fear that if the government feels cornered, it could unleash even harsher crackdowns or seek deeper reliance on Moscow for survival. But others believe that once a population overcomes fear, no amount of force can turn back the tide. The world is watching closely. From Warsaw to Washington, leaders are calling for dialogue, while Russia watches with concern that similar movements could inspire dissent at home. The Belarusian people, however, aren't waiting for anyone's permission. Their message is clear: they want change, and they're willing to stand in the streets day after day until they get it. This movement is reshaping Belarus's national identity. For years, many viewed the country as quiet and compliant, living under the shadow of Moscow. Now it's become a symbol of defiance. The courage displayed by these protesters has inspired people across the globe, reminding us that even in the most repressive environments, the human spirit's demand for freedom cannot be extinguished. As we continue to monitor the situation, one thing is certain: the story of Belarus is still being written. Whether this ends in reform, revolution, or repression, the events unfolding today will define the nation's future for generations. The people have spoken loudly. They want an end to authoritarianism and a new beginning built on freedom and fairness. And no matter how long it takes, that demand will not disappear. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more updates on this developing story. If you found this analysis insightful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth coverage of global political shifts and power struggles.